in a piece of writing, it's important to be able to include simple, compound and complex sentences. So this is an activity you can do to make sure that you're able to do all three. First of all, start with a blank piece of paper, and you start not at the top but in the middle, and you start by writing a simple sentence. For example, in this one, the baby cried. In a sentence, to make it complete, you need a noun, at least one noun. You can have one, more than one if you like, and you need a verb, a doing word. So the baby cried satisfies this. It's a simple sentence. Moving on, we're going to improve this by adding adjectives and adverbs, just one of each. So from the baby cried, we've moved on to the exhausted baby cried loudly. Exhausted is an adjective, it describes the baby, and loudly is an adverb. It describes how the verb is being done, crying loudly. Moving on, going over to the left, we're going to work on building up to a compound sentence now. So stage 2 is to add another simple sentence to the one that we've got already. Here we go. The exhausted baby cried loudly was where we were at the top in the middle. And now we're adding his mum picked him up. Both of those sentences are complete and they're simple. To link them together, we're going to use a connective. Some people call this a conjunction. It just means the same thing. So our connective here is the word until. The exhausted baby cried loudly until his mum picked him up. If you use a conjunction or a connective to link two simple sentences together, there's no need for a comma, as you don't need to take a breath. So here we've got a compound sentence. Now if we move back up to the top again, where we were with this sentence, the exhausted baby cried loudly, we can go over to the right and we can start working on a complex sentence. A complex sentence is when you add a clause of information. It could go at the end, in the middle, or at the beginning. The clause that you add is not a complete sentence, it's just a piece of extra information that doesn't make sense by itself, but will enhance the simple sentence. So let's start with one at the end, as that's the simplest way to do it. The exhausted baby cried loudly, and here is the clause, hoping his mum would come. Hoping his mum would come is a clause. It's not a whole sentence. It doesn't make sense by itself. It's a good idea to start your clause with an ing verb. Here we've got hoping. So, the exhausted baby cried loudly, hoping his mum would come. Makes sense. Where we had that breath, there is a comma separating the simple sentence to the clause on the end. Moving on, the next stage is to kind of reverse that sentence and put a clause at the beginning. You can use the same clause, hoping his mum would come, but just put it at the beginning. Of course, you've got to make sure that you change the first letter for a capital, but apart from that, it's just a flip from the end to the beginning. Hoping his mum would come, the exhausted baby cried loudly. Again, the comma goes between the clause and the main sentence. And then finally, sorry it's a bit blurry, we can drop a clause in the middle. This is the hardest one to do, but the children tend to pick up on this pretty quickly and they learn it fairly soon. Here the clause that we've dropped in is still hoping his mum would come, but we're adding who was at the beginning to make it easier to understand. So we've got the exhausted baby who was hoping his mum would come, cried loudly. Now here we need two breaths, one before the clause and one after the clause. Notice the who was, as I said, makes it sound more understandable. If you are using a noun in your sentence that's not alive, and we've got baby, if you were using something like a dictionary, the dictionary, which was perched on the shelf, fell off, you need to use which was instead of who was there. So if it's alive, use who was. If it's not alive, use which was. And that's basically how you do a sentence wheel. So we go from simple sentence to improving it. Going down this way, we're making it compound. Going down this way, we're making it complex. So within that wheel, we have got all of the three different types of sentences.